today I have a gentleman with us by the name of Dr. John Hammond. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah, good to have you with us. And I'm excited to hear what you have to say. I have heard some stories, but I know that there's a lot of gold hidden away there. So, John, just to sort of break the ice, so to speak, for the people listening, could you please tell us what one of your favorite hobbies is to do?
Apart from having grandchildren, I have a strange hobby. Actually, I make knives. And that goes back to the days when my father, who was a surgeon, when I was a little boy, he would sharpen a blade until he could take a hair and lay it across the top and snap. And that started me on the knife business. I'm very gentle. I never stabbed anybody, but I make knives.
Okay. Wow. And so do you what materials do you use? Like, how do you do handles and things like that?
I have some very exotic wood from all over the world for the handles.
Wow.
And for the blades, I'll either buy some quality steel or I will use coil cast springs and straighten them in the forge, or I'll use files and make knives out of the files, or old bearings, very, very hard steel. So it's a lot of hard work, about 50 hours for a knife. So I enjoy it.
Wow. Okay. Nice. And I have one more question.
Sure.
And it's going to be random, I know, but what's your favorite food?
I grew up in Malaysia, so give me a good curry with
Oh, curry.
with a bit of heat in it.
A bit of it. Oh, okay. Very good. All right, awesome. Okay, so today, John, I've invited you here, obviously, to give us a bit of your testimony, to tell us how you came into contact with Jesus of your own self, how you've had what Jesus has done for you in your life and your families, and I know that you've got a couple of really good stories to tell us about your history. So I'm going to give you the floor, and I'm going to let you go into it. And yeah, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Burden. Just by way of introduction, I'm a Kempsey boy from Kempsey, North New South Wales, and my dad was a doctor there. And 76 years later, my son is a doctor in the same town. So the wheel has turned a full circle.
That's cool.
And so this story starts in 1949. By the way, I was in the education business. I've been retired for 12 years, but I started off as a primary teacher, elementary, then secondary. Then I taught teacher training at college and university, and then went into education administration. So I've been very blessed in life. Education is my game. I'm not a preacher. I'm a storyteller for Jesus. So it all started in Kempsey, and my parents were living there.
Yeah.
And my dad, as I indicated, was a doctor, and doctors make good money. And he got a call one day from a group in Sydney saying, we would like you to go to Malaya and be a missionary surgeon. And my dad, who generally made up his mind fairly quickly, he said, okay. And then half an hour later, after talking to my poor mother, my mother's a very long-suffering person. She would have turned 107 yesterday.
Oh.
She said, you better ask some questions. And so he rang them up and he said, why? What's going on? And they said, oh, we have a vacancy. What sort of a vacancy? Why is there a vacancy? And they said, well, the doctor in charge of the hospital has left. And why did he leave? Well, he left in a bit of a hurry. So what's going on? And so finally he said, the guy on the phone said, well, there's a war going on and it's not a safe place to be, but you'll be right. And so that really pleased my dad no end. And then they said, there's something else that you need to be aware of. And they warned us about the cobra, particularly the king cobra. And you'll see on the screen a hamadryad or king cobra. And I have seen one of these 5 meters in length. They are the largest and crankiest poisonous snake in the whole world. And so on that cheerful thought, we flew from Sydney to Darwin, Darwin to Singapore, then Singapore up to Penang, which was to be our home for some time. And so we arrived and late at night and moved into our new home. And early in the morning, my father decided to have a look out the back. He was barefoot because Malaysia is a very hot place. And he opened the back door and he put his foot on the middle of the back of I'll go to the old language, 13-foot hamadryad. Well, that thing moved, not half as fast as my dad did. And he came in and he slammed the door. And he said to my mother, he was shaken, he said, don't unpack. There's a plane going back to Australia, down to Singapore tomorrow afternoon, and the Hammond family is going to be on it. And so we sat down and had breakfast. Now, I was only 4, and I remember it because my dad was not a person who would spook easily. And so he sat down and we tried to enjoy our Weet-Bix or whatever it was we had. And the house was empty. It was just a table and chairs and that was it. And then he said, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to test God on this one. We've come a long way and I'm frightened. And I'm going to ask God for a sign. And he'd better give us one or we will go home. So we had prayer. He asked God for a sign. And to do something like this is fairly risky. There's a lot of funny words in the Bible. And he opened it and he read a text that he had never seen before and was to become the favorite of our family. And he put his thumb in and he opened his Bible and then he opened it to read. And under his thumb was this text, Luke 10, verse 19. Listen to it. Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. Well, he was shaking and he closed his Bible and he said to my mother, I think we have to stay. Well, we stayed there all right. We stayed there for 12 years. And in that 12 years, we killed 12 snakes in the bathroom alone, not counting the rest of the house. I can remember one day he was operating my parents and my family in the early days in Malaya. On one occasion, we were having lunch and we noticed a snake going like that at the back door. And we ran out the house and we rang my father. And he was in the middle of doing an operation. And he said to the anaesthetist, you just keep this patient ticking over for 15 minutes. I just got to rush home and take care of the snake. So he came home and got rid of the snake, went back, finished the operation. The patient never knew anything about it or even got every extra charge. And I can remember going to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and it was one of these oriental bathrooms with a shower going straight onto the floor and a hole out the wall. And there lying on the floor, right in front of me was a great big snake, a big cobra. They were all cobras that seemed to like our bathrooms because it was cool in the evening. And so life went on, but it was a happy life. Here we are, my two brothers and myself. I'm the good-looking one in the middle, the blondie, and we had a ride in a trishaw. It was about the last time this trishaw smiled all day because we pinched it and drove off. Well, he went to have a coffee somewhere, and he was very excited, and for good reason. And we had many pets. There was our pet gibbon ape, not a monkey, it was an ape, and we rescued this. And this little thing called Din, because of the noise it made, was very loving. There's the three Hammond brothers in our little Morris Oxford. Now, that'll feature in the story in a minute. And if you look at the next slide, we were there being guarded by a policeman as we went down to the market. Now, the problem was there was a war going on. It was called the Communist Terrorist Emergency. And every European head was worth $5,000 attached or otherwise.
Wow. And
we lived away from the hospital compound. And it was dangerous. And many of the European settlers, the rubber planters, were being shot dead, and they were asking people to leave the country. And the common form of car for the Europeans was the car in this next picture. It is a 1940 Ford. And if you look at it closely, it's got half a ton of armor plate all over it and a flap on the windscreen. And it was bulletproof to an extent. But they knew how to handle that. The bandits would chop a tree down in front on a jungle trail and then chop a tree down behind, and they would just wait. Because in that heat and pre-air conditioning days in a car, sooner or later you would have to get out and they would pick you off. Our armor-clad car, and this is our little Morris Oxford, P5104. And that's a picture of my dad crossing a river on a rather rickety raft to go and treat some of the villagers. Now, the Communist terrorist war was led by the man in the next picture. And his name was Chin Peng. And everybody was trying to get him. They had a reward for, I think, about $500,000 on his head. And the next picture will show a photo of him. And he was quite deadly, and they had a number of peace talks, but it didn't stop people being killed. And we all had to have identity cards. And don't laugh, but look at the next picture. Here I am with my identity card. And every person over the age of 12 had to have one of these. And it's written in Malay, which I could understand and read. And if you didn't carry this, you were arrested, and someone had to go and collect you from jail. It didn't matter what color you were. But the bandits would come to your house at 1 a.m, and they would knock on your door, and you'd open it, and they would have a pistol, and they'd just shoot you dead. And it got quite dangerous, and every time the door knocked, you were quite nervous. And one particular morning, we got that knock on the door, and we all had our assigned hiding spots. Mine was under the bed, which, believe you me, when you're a frightened 4 or 5-year-old, it's not a very secure spot. And Dad went to the door, and he stood behind a pillar, and he said in Malay, "Who is it?" Berapa itu? He said it in Chinese, he said it in English, and he said it in Tamil. And finally a voice said, "Doctor, we have a sick man." And Dad took his Hippocratic oath very seriously, and he opened the door, and there were two blokes there. And he said, "Where's the sick man?" Oh, they said, "He's in the car." Well, he walked to the car, fully expecting that this was to be the last walk of his life. He said later that his legs were just almost powerless. And when he got to the car, lying on the back seat was a very sick young man. And he was the man in the first photo of the bandit. And he said, "You better get him to the hospital." "Why didn't you take him to the hospital?" They said, "Oh, we went to the government hospital and they sent us away. Told us to come back at tomorrow morning." So he said, "Quickly, take him to the hospital. He's nearly dead." He had a ruptured appendix, and my dad operated on him. And he saved his life, kept him in the hospital for 3 weeks, never charged him a cent, and he went home. And we weren't aware of that action because the young man was Chin Peng himself,
Wow.
a wanted terrorist. And
Wow.
so the rampage went on, and it came to a climax in 1952, I think it was, when the governor, Sir Henry Gurney, went up to Fraser Hill for a cemetery. So I would like to say that this was my car when we lived in Malaya, but it was a beautiful black Rolls Royce. And here we have a picture of Sir Henry Gurney standing in front of that same Rolls Royce. And it was the last photo ever taken of him. He was dead 30 minutes later.
Wow.
Because as he was going down a twisty road from Fraser Hill, he was ambushed by the communist terrorists. You'll notice that there are a number of bullet holes circled. There were 53 bullet holes. And Sir Henry, in an act of great courage, he stepped out of the car and he walked straight towards the machine gun, and he was killed. And if you look at the next picture, I tracked the car down a few years ago in the museum, and it was restored. It was used by future governors, but it is in rather poor condition. And so Sir Henry Gurney was buried, and here we have a picture of his grave. He was a very brave man. And at that point, they were telling every European to get out of the country. And when they approached my dad, they said, "By whose orders?" "Oh, well, it's not an order, but it's a suggestion." And he said, "Well, I work under the orders and instructions of the Most High God." And we stayed. And, there were occasions when we were driving, we'd see a guy with a gun just step from behind a tree, take a look and step back. And we had no idea what was happening. But the day before we left Penang, by this time I was nearly 16, and my dad was already back in Australia. And there was a knock on the door. By this stage, the emergency was over and Malaya was a safe place again. So I went to the door, and there was a Chinese man standing there, and he said, "Is Dr. Hammond there?" And I said, "No, he went back to Australia." "Oh, is Mrs. Hammond there?" I said, "Yes." "Can I come in?" I said, "Lai Chupeng, come in." And he sat down and he asked my mother if she could remember the case of the young man whom my father had operated on all those years before. And she could sort of remember it. And they said, "Well, his name was Chin Peng." Well, anyone listening in Malaysia, they hear the name of Chin Peng, the hair probably starts to stand up on the back of their neck. And then he produced a piece of paper. To this day, I wish I still had it. It was about A5 size. And there was a photograph of our car and our family standing in front of it. To get that photograph, they had entered our house and rifled through my mother's camphorwood chest to find the album and take the photo out. And it was published. And it was on a pamphlet that was sent to every communist terrorist camp from Johor in the south to the Siamese border. And there was a message in Malay and Chinese, and I could read the Malay. And it simply said, "This is the Hammond family. Under no circumstances are they ever to be harmed in any way.
Wow.
This is my protection order, signed Jinping." And so it was the day before we left. God opened the window of heaven just a little crack, and he revealed to us how his hand had been over us all that time.
Amazing.
And, you know, in my work, I've had many people ask me, is there a God? You try and disprove that there is a God to me. I will always say there is a God. He saved our life. He saved the life of our family. But, you know, it wasn't all a marvelous time. Sooner or later, I was homeschooled through primary school, but sooner or later it came time to go to high school. So, and here is St. Xavier's Institution. And if you look at the next picture, here is a staff shop. And I just want to say something about the school. I had some teachers who should never have been in front of a classroom, but I'm not critical of the Catholic education system, because one of the men in that photo really brought about my conversion. A marvelous Catholic lay preacher. And I wasn't doing very well in school. Let me say this much. I don't think I've ever passed a maths test in my life.
Both.
I was mathematically dyslexic. Today they call it dyscalculia. And no amount of beating or anything could make me do maths. And I was also a middle child and perhaps a bit stubborn. And the education ethic in those days was, if you're not learning, cop a hiding or two and you'll start to learn. Well, it just didn't work with me. So bad that my younger brother finished several years ahead of me in school. I was really, without any joking or with any pride, was hopeless. And I was good at some subjects, but not in maths, which seemed to be the be-all and end-all of intelligence at school. And I had a maths teacher who was in that group, but out of care for him, I'm not going to identify him. He had such a violent temper that he would just go from 0 to red in half a second. So we called him Prawnhead. He would come in, point his finger, cross-eyed, and half the class would stand up in a state of terror. Well, he was my maths teacher, and this is what he would do. By the way, he didn't necessarily pick on me because I was me. He would pick on anybody. He should never, ever have been allowed in front of a classroom. He would give you a stick of chalk. Now, there's many people who might not know what a stick of chalk is, but that's what we used to write on the blackboard with. And he would write a problem on the blackboard, and then he'd give me the chalk, and he would start to count in Malay. Satu, dua, tiga, empat, and through to sepuluh, which is 10. And at that stage, he would get a cane, or we called it a rattan, probably 2 meters in length, and he would whack you across the back of your bare knees so hard you would just fall up. And you would drop the chalk and collapse on the floor, and then he'd give you a few seconds, he'd pick you up, give you the piece of chalk, which was now in about 3 pieces, and just start again. Satu, dua, tiga, until you'd had about 6. And then he would throw you out. And then I was at the mercy of the deputy headmaster, who was always the hard man on campus. And if he caught me, he would take me down to the quadrangle and bend you over a desk that was permanently there, and that you'd get another 6. No questions asked. So I was so scared that my older brother, Brian, would have to tow me to school on his bike. I could not turn the pedals, and out of sheer fear. And on this particular day, I decided that I would try and run away and hide somewhere in the school. So I did, because I knew that the deputy principal, whose name was the Tiger, or Lahore in Hokkien Chinese, was constantly on the prowl, and he used to wear white sneakers, and he walked soundlessly. And to this day, I remember those white sneakers. I was too scared to look at his face, but I sure knew that they were Dunlop Volley sand shoes. So I cleared off and I ran down to the big hall. And in the stage door, I ran at the back and I hid in the curtains. They were all folded together. And I thought if I could stay there, I wouldn't be seen. But the man in the picture with the arrow at him is the only person I have identified, and his name was Jimmy Boyle. And he was my geography teacher. And it won't surprise you that many years later, when I did a PhD, it was in geography. And he wasn't a particularly marvelous teacher, but he was a very kind and good man. And he had been brutally tortured by the Japanese during the war because he had a hidden radio and he would not reveal where it was. And he was quite melancholy, and he would go down and play the piano. He was very, very musical. And there was a big grand piano, and he looked through the open door and he spotted me and he spotted somebody else marching down, and that was the Tiger, Lahore. He was looking for me, and Jimmy Boyle, he just called me like that. And I walked over and wondered what was going on. And he said, just stand there and say nothing. So I stood there, and he was playing the piano. And all of a sudden I looked down and I saw the dreaded white Dunlop Volley sand shoes. And I thought, here we go. Now, the Tiger had such a grip of fear on the school that even Jimmy Boyle, my teacher, stood up when the Tiger appeared, and he had just struck a chord with his left hand on the bass strings. And you know, all these years later, I can still see the vibration on those strings. I was too scared to look anywhere else.
Wow.
And he stood up and he said, "It's okay. Sir, John Hammond is with me today." And the Tiger looked at me and he went, which to me was the roar of a wild tiger anyway. And away he went.
Wow.
And after a while, when my heartbeat returned to some semblance of normality, he started to talk to me, and he said, "Look, I've been invited to enter a contest to compose a national anthem for Malaysia, which was about to become an independent country." And so he started to play some tunes, and he said they have selected 50 of the composers in the country, and he'd play a tune. He said, "What do you think of that?" Well, if he had played Bar Bar Black Sheep, I would have said, "That's very nice, Mr. Boyle." And so it went on for an hour and a half. And then the bell went for the end of school, and I knew that I had lived yet another day. I could talk for a long time about fear and a child. That's why I became a teacher. That's why I became a primary teacher. And surprisingly, even though I'm a poor mathematician, I became a very good math teacher at primary level, because I can look into the face of a child and tell whether they're not learning and whether they are frightened, because maths is the giant killer for small children. And if there is anybody here listening and they can remember the fear that they had in school, I know all about it. After all these years, I still shiver at the thought of the hidings that I got trying to teach me maths. Just on the side, I was 30 before I started university, and I cleverly wove around all those subjects that didn't involve maths. And I finally got caught. I had to do one in statistics, and I went into the exam room, and it was multiple choice. And so I figured if I just went tick, 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 statistically, I should get 25%. I got 23.5%, and I was pretty thrilled.
Pretty good.
And so that was my adventure. Here was Jimmy Boyle sitting at the piano, and he stood up, and he came next to me, and he put his arm around me, which pretty well you're not allowed to do these days. And he said, "John Hammond, what's going to become of you? We talk about you in the staff room. Half the staff reckon that you are smart but bone lazy, and the other half reckon that you are dumb. And your two brothers do brilliantly in school. Your father's a surgeon, and you missed out, is what they say." So I thought, well, this is true. I was used to this, by the way. People were pretty quick in those days. And he said, "I want to tell you something. I believe that you will make your mark in life. I'll tell you something. It's because Jesus loves you, and so do I. And he has a plan for you." And he gave me a hug, and he walked out of my life. I never saw him again. He actually composed one of the anthems for Malaya when it became Malaya as an independent country, and later Malaysia. And I always like to think that Jimmy Boyle was the composer, and he won the contest with a little bit of help from John Hammond. Well, we went back, and I left school. Then I went back, and I did, I think, about 46 different jobs before I went back to school as the oldest student I think they'd ever had. And I did primary teaching. And the day I taught my first lesson, the lights just came on. And apart from the exam and stats, I never, ever failed anything again. And I became a demonstration teacher in high school. Then I taught teacher training. We went out to Fiji, where I became principal of Fulton College, and then later Longbourn College in New Zealand. And I had a long and very happy career, but in 2006, I broke my neck and my back, and I was in a coma for many, many weeks, and I wasn't expected to live. The family was called in a number of times to say goodbye to me. And when you wake up out of a long coma, people ask me, what was it like on the other side? Let me tell you, there was nothing. I was completely out to it. And I broke my neck on the 16th of November. I woke up on Christmas morning. And even now, all these years later, I still have trouble trying to work out what happened in that time. What I do know is the day I woke out of the coma, God spoke to me. It wasn't a loud shouting voice. It wasn't a long message. God doesn't have to give you long messages, but I'll never forget what he said. I was lying there wondering where I was and what had happened. I didn't know at that stage that I'd broken my neck. I was just lying there, and I had a halo brace on, and I'd also broken my back.
Yeah.
God spoke to me and he said, your work is not yet finished. That was it. Let me tell you, that was the most marvelous, comforting message I could have ever received. And that was quite a few years ago now. And the Lord restored my mind. For a long time, I couldn't think of anything. I tried to read a book sitting in a chair for months, and I could never get past halfway through page 1. I'd forget how it had started. And gradually, it was like a jigsaw puzzle. Little bits were put in one at a time, and God restored my memory. And I think he let me go through that experience so that I would know that I really depend on him. Don't take anything for granted.
Yes.
I said to my son, who came and said goodbye to me, and I said to him, son, if I had have died, just remember I would have died in the Lord, and that I had a wonderful and happy career and a beautiful family. Well, I went on and discovered that I had a grandchild on the way. And now I've got 5 grandchildren. And I still love to tell the story of Jesus. There is a God. And he is crazy about us. He thinks about us all the time. He would do anything to see us saved for the kingdom of heaven. He's not sitting up there with a stick saying, you can go to the left and you can go to the right. He just will do anything. And we take one step towards him and he takes a running step towards us.
Amen.
He takes towards us. And I look back now, I wouldn't change anything. Well, there were a few days I think I should have stayed in bed like all of us, but I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't want to go through some of it again.
Yeah.
But I praise the Lord for what he's done and given me the ability to tell the story of Jesus. And so I say to all people watching, God bless you. He absolutely adores you. He's obsessed with you, and he wants to see you in the kingdom of heaven. God willing, you'll be there. Thank you.